Welcome everybody, depending on where you're calling in from. We welcome you here from Right Hand. I am very excited to welcome today's webinar guest. We have Ira Winkler. Ira Winkler is the Chief Security Architect at Walmart, and he's also the author of this book that I've got here right next to me, Security Awareness for Dummies, that we're going to be diving into later. He's also the author of You Can Stop Stupid. So I'm really excited for today's session with Ira. We're going to be diving into really just the mind of a security leader, someone who has spent a lot of time researching and rolling out security awareness programs. We're going to be covering a lot of what to do. We're going to be covering a lot of what not to do based on his experience and his learnings. For our audience here today that has joined us, if you have any questions, you'll see here on this Zoom that there's a Q&A button. Feel free to type your questions into the Q&A. I'll be moderating today's conversation with Ira. So if there is a question in there that you have, type it in and I'll do my best to work it into today's discussion. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. We'll officially kick this off here. And Ira, welcome. It's great to see you. Great to talk to you.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So Ira, I gave a quick introduction here just as we were getting started, a little bit about your role, but maybe if you just wanted to take a moment, it would be great if you could just introduce yourself, tell us about your background, and even tell us what led you into cybersecurity in the first place, if you want to kind of take us back to that point in time, and why are you so passionate about awareness?
So so with that, that's kind of like going around it almost in a circle where all I have to do is, I start at the beginning and that's where I can end it theoretically. When you go ahead and you talk about, so I graduated college with a psychology major and everybody thinks, oh, well, psychology, therefore it's like, no, it was the easiest major to get. I had to have a major to graduate. And at that point, the only people that would hire me was the US government. And luckily, I did really well on some aptitude test I took as a fluke because I walked in the career office and said, I wanted to go in the foreign service because I wanted to travel the world. And they're like, well, if you're going to talk to them, there's a booklet outside from a place you probably never heard of before. And, there's a bunch of puzzles. And if you could kind of get through a few of them, maybe you want to take the test. Anyway, I'm like, this book here, they're like, yeah. I go, oh, I finished all the puzzles in it. And they're like, take the test. So anyway, I did really well on the test and interviewed at NSA. And they're like, well, you have really good computer aptitude. How about a computer internship where we'll train you to be a computer person? I'm like, no, I hate computers. I want nothing to do with them. They're like, okay, what about cryptanalysis where you'll be breaking codes? And I go, I'm not looking at ones and zeros all day. Then I finally took a job as an intelligence analyst, working a 24/7 operation shift for incoming data. And God, did I hate that job. And I thought I couldn't hate computers any more than I hated that job. So I went back and, got on the computer internship after a year and a half. And since then I was doing technically, I didn't look at it as doing cybersecurity, but my first programming role was cryptanalysis, working supercomputers and stuff like that. So I ended up having to, my first job was programming a cray, which means absolutely nothing today, but it sounded so special way back then. But anyway, then I went on to do system design, development, deployment around the world, research and development supporting tactical military operations and things like that. And then eventually I worked for government contractors. Along the way, once I got out of NSA, I started writing started writing and speaking because, not exactly convenient to do that there. And so one day I was working for a defense contractor. Sorry, gotta let my wife know I'm on a webinar. But anyway, so I went ahead and I basically essentially, somebody came to me and said, going to the Pentagon, can you make a few calls? And 3 days later, I had control over one of the world's largest investment banks. It was kind of a rush to steal $1 billion. And I thought, can I really focus on this? And then, I looked at it, and frankly, my whole career at NSA and working for government contractors pretty much was doing some aspect of cybersecurity. Now, the human aspects, clearly what I did was social engineering, to take over the bank. And, to me, that was just like, I never thought that would work. Calling somebody up and asking for their password. I mean, what idiot would give me their password? What was going through my head? And I ended up thinking, oh, I'm going to get caught right away. And they gave me their password. And from there, I could just, I just started getting one after another after another. It was so easy. And then people would say, oh, you're really good at conning people. Why don't you go ahead and teach a social security awareness course for us so people don't fall for that stuff? And I did that for years, and I made a lot of money doing that. Eventually, I started my own company, and I was focusing on penetration testing, including espionage, simulation, social engineering. And I would do this, and I would go ahead and I would give these talks as part of the consulting. And then here's the thing. Everybody says, oh, we should have social engineers teach us, because clearly these social engineers know how to trick us. So therefore, they'd be great in doing that. Let me tell you how stupid that actually turned out to be. Because what happened was, I went into a company, I robbed them blind, and then they had me do an awareness presentation. Like a few weeks later, I came back, told everybody what I did. The people who heard it thought that was great, and so on. And maybe it was an itty bitty tiny moving of a needle. Then what happened was, they invited me back 6 months later to see where everything was at that point in time. And I went ahead and I did another espionage simulation against them, and it was worse then. And ironically, what happened was, so I met with the CISO who had me in, and I debriefed him, and he said, before you leave, we have this guy who he's the admin for all these systems that you hacked while you were there. And he wants to talk to you before you leave to find out how you did what you did to his systems and so on, and got all the data, because he wants to make sure he secured it. I'm like, okay. Then the first thing he said was, why me? And I go, this sounds like a cliche, but you had all the data. He's like, okay, fair enough. And then I explained how I hacked his systems, which I did do both hacking and social engineering there. That's how a real operation would do it. And when I was meeting with him, I go, okay, now I have a question for you. Why is security worse now than it was before? And he's like, oh, that's easy. He's like, you came, maybe you talked, you gave your awareness. Everybody thought, oh, that was great. Ha, 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 how funny. And then they went back to doing exactly what they were doing, because, what's the likelihood you're coming back? Then what happened was, the CEO put out a letter. The CEO said, security is important. He's like, what do you do with a letter from your CEO? He's like, here, I have 3 letters from the CEO saying, sexual harassment is bad. Yes, I agree. And then you read it, you acknowledge it, you throw it in the trash. Then, do not steal from the company. Yes, that is important. I acknowledge that. I throw that in the trash. Cybersecurity is important. Yes, I agree. I acknowledge that. I throw that in the trash. He's like, on the other hand, let me show you this other message. And this other message came out not from the CEO, but from the head of physical security. And what happened was, the head of physical security put out a message, because this was a Southern California type of company. And I don't know if those of you are there, but Southern California is iconic for 1 or 2 story office buildings that have lovely glass windows so people can look outside. And then, since they want to conserve water in Southern California, they don't have grass. They have these nice big decorative rocks. And people would take these nice big decorative rocks, throw it through the window, and then jump in there, grab the computers and anything else in the offices, and run away. And he's like, here's the message from the head of security about that. He's like, we have a series of issues regarding physical break-ins of these things. What you are going to do is, at the end of every day, if you have a window office, you're going to put your shades down, turn off your lights, and lock your door. Your manager will be responsible for ensuring that you turn off your lights, lock the door, and whatever. Then security guards will do rounds to ensure that you've put down your shades, turned off your lights, locked your door. On your first violation, you will get a warning. On your second violation or beyond, you might be fired. He's like, that told me exactly what the problem was, exactly what the solution was, exactly what the penalty was, what the enforcement was, and so on. All of a sudden, smash and grabs went down dramatically, as opposed to somebody telling these horror, these entertaining stories about how easy it was to trick people. They gave actionable information to do this. Now, I realize this isn't the question you asked, but this was actually a very critical role in understanding security awareness. Because in security awareness, we have this fascination with telling people about a hacker, having a social engineer come in and talk to you, and so on. There is a major difference. Just because somebody can break a light bulb, it doesn't mean they can fix a light bulb or build a light bulb. It's the same thing with breaking people. There's a totally different philosophy in social engineering than there is in security awareness. Because social engineering deals one-on-one with a person. In security awareness, we're dealing with how do we influence a large group of people for better, more secure security behaviors. So anyway, but then, my passion about it, when did I become passionate? I was passionate the whole time, honestly. I forgot what the rest of your question was, but if there's anything you want me to expand upon, let me know while I enjoy my Mountain Dew Zero.
Thanks, Ira. No, it was an interesting story. I was laughing earlier on because you were talking about how you hated computers earlier in your career, which is ironic because clearly you are at the top of your profession in devoting your career to protecting those computers that you hated so much once.
Yeah, I hate computers and I hate writing, and now I write about computers.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and very interesting story. You're relating, obviously, for our audience here, you're relating the essence of a physical breach to a cyber breach, and then educating and implementing a program or a process about how you can reduce the likelihood of that physical breach with the rocks flying through the windows, is the image that you portrayed, and then alluding to how that could be influenced in the cyber field.
Yeah, because I'm going to interrupt you here, because here's one of the biggest fallacies in cybersecurity and security awareness. We tend to treat our users like they're the special snowflake, like we are the only profession that ever had to deal with human error, what I call user-initiated loss, of all the professions in the world that are out there. You have other fields like safety science. You have other fields like accounting. You have other fields like physical security that all in one way or another deal with user error. And we are not learning from these disciplines in how to better address not just the error, but the actions, because we don't care about, does a person know? Just because they know it doesn't mean they're actually going to care. It doesn't mean they're going to do anything. We care about how to change behaviors. And we're highly ineffective in security awareness in general in changing behaviors, because we live and breathe these pontifications from people who talk about human firewall and all this other crap, as opposed to how do we acknowledge, and frankly, we need to acknowledge that good security behaviors are not something we should beg users to do, but good security behaviors are part of an employee's responsibilities from day one. And awareness should not be, please, please, please don't screw our company. Please care about what I'm saying. We should be telling people, we love you. We want you to work for us, but security is as important as your job as important to your job as filling out your time card. Nobody ever criticizes people and says, "Oh, poor person." We're not going to. Yes, we'll pay you even if you don't want to fill out a time card. Nobody does that. Why in cybersecurity are we sitting here saying you need to have a good password, you need to lock your desk at the end of the day, and we're going to enforce that, and that's part of your job description, like it was for me at NSA and defense contractors I worked for.
When you look at my career, I've always worked in cybersecurity, but at one point in time, I was just purely focused on sales, right? And I'm just going back to my job description in sales. It was just very centric on deriving revenue to a company. You can think about it from the perspective of a recruiter, right? They're measured, their KPIs are being able to attract talent and bring talent into an organization. Marketing, human resources, technical, whatever the role is. What you just said, I obviously completely agree with. Awareness is not the focus. Really, it's a poorly worded industry, right? We call ourselves those in the security awareness industry, but our goal is not awareness. As you said, our goal is actually behavior change and influencing a culture across an entire organization of security. Maybe could you touch on just for a couple minutes, and then I want to dive more into this book too. I've got some pieces I want to call out and talk to you about. Building behavior change versus building awareness, right? I think you alluded to this concept of checking a box. Just giving somebody maybe like an annual video that could essentially help you achieve awareness. They're aware of it, but is that something that's going to actually help you implement a change in behavior where information is being retained and put into practice operationally for an employee? Walk us through, if you have just like a couple tips, a couple of best practices. Where should, for our audience here, if they're looking to build and implement a program that focuses on behavior change, where should they start? What are some of the things that they should think about? What are some of the things that they should do?
So in the first place, we need to look at what are the behaviors we want to embody. That's number one. And we want to figure out how do we get people to implement the right behaviors. Now, depending on what those behaviors are, we should have some level of enforcement for those behaviors. We should have some level of enforcement to say, hey, you need to lock your desk. Not please lock your desk, you need to lock your desk, as an example. And enforcement, and I'm not saying fire people just, whenever you feel like it, but enforcement means this is part of your security related job. I think for most security awareness professionals, they just really have to change their perception of what their job is. Their job is not, for example, marketing. And what I mean by marketing is the promotion of information to kind of get 2% of the population to buy Coca-Cola over Pepsi, as an example. That means
I thought you were going to say Mountain Dew.
Yeah, no, I mean, everybody should buy Mountain Dew. The fact they don't is their failure. I'll leave it at that. But the reality is that, the first place we have to look at, how can we lead people to better behaviors proactively? For example, you could tell people what a good password should be. Why aren't good passwords embedded within computer policies to ensure these systems enforce a good password so a user doesn't have an opportunity to put in a bad password? Regarding reuse of passwords, as an example, ensure multi-factor authentication is put in place, because no matter what you do, I promise you, people will reuse passwords. That's a given. How can we go ahead and change and improve behaviors to do something like that? Now, clearly, we need some sort of enforcement, such as threat intelligence and looking at the dark web for compromised credentials that are out there by, sites have I been pawned and stuff like that. But you need to go ahead and start to focus on what are the behaviors, then go ahead. And one of the things that the awareness profession is horrible at is justifying their existence. And the way you justify your existence is figuring out what are the root metrics I need to collect to see if behaviors are changing. So for example, I use phishing, and everybody uses phishing simulation as an example of awareness behaviors. Frankly, most people don't click on a phishing simulation because they recognize it's a phishing simulation. You can look in the sender box, and half these people have the company name of the phishing company that sent the message there, and it's a phishing message from the start. So what we really need to do is to go ahead and say, hey, what are the root? When I look at what are actual incidents from phishing, you can look, for example, at malware incidents on your network. Malware incidents, that sounds technical, but malware gets on your network through phishing messages, through clicks on links, through malicious websites, through USB drives, through whatever else. And that's a root metric you can study over time. And you can start to see whether or not your awareness program has had fewer malware incidents on your network. Because again, most of the time, they're only there because of an awareness failing. Then start looking at other metrics along the same lines. Go ahead, do physical walkthroughs, because if somebody has poor physical security, they likely are exercising poor cybersecurity as well. So if somebody leaves their desk opened, if they leave sensitive materials on the desk while unattended, they're likely going to have poor cybersecurity. They're going to have poor practices, such as looking at sensitive messages in a Starbucks, as an example, or whatever the other cases are. I think I answered your question. I doubt it, but I gave it a shot.
You absolutely did. You absolutely did. And you actually answered what my next question was going to be is, once you focus on behavior change as opposed to just awareness, how do you measure behavior change, right? It seems a bit conceptual. It seems a little bit in the sky, in the clouds, hard to measure. But those are some real life examples of how that can be done. That's great. Now, getting people to change that behavior, you obviously have to build a process and a program. You talked about having the right tools, enforcing the right behaviors with the right process or the right configurations and technology that you alluded to. There's a cost to all this. And I know this was kind of the meat of what this webinar was about. It's like that hidden cost of awareness. Obviously, you want to buy a tool, you want to buy a platform. It costs money. But in your book here, you actually dove into this. You talked specifically about some of the hidden costs of awareness. And I've got my bookmark here. I found something that I wanted to read out here, and we can talk, a little bit about what you mean. One of the things that you wrote here, and I'm going to actually just read straight out of the book. If an employee spends a brief 10 minutes per month on awareness training, that's going to equate to 2 hours per year. For every 1,000 employees at your organization, that's going to equate to the equivalent of one full-time person per year devoted just to taking awareness on an 8x5, 52 weeks a year job.
Exactly.
So it's interesting, right? And, on this call, we've got people, security leaders, people who have delivered their own security awareness programs. Perhaps they're in the process of evaluating what they've done. Maybe they want to make some changes, or maybe they're just thinking for the future, how they can make sure they do it right. What you're alluding to here is that when you implement a security awareness program, you're not just buying a tool for X amount of money. There's also an impact this has to an organization. In this, I'm just paraphrasing now, but in this chapter I read, you also talk about frontline workers, right? These are hourly employees potentially that are now being devoted to training. Every minute they're training, they're not being devoted to generating whatever revenue or whatever type of business impact they were intended to do. Can you elaborate just a little bit on your thesis here and how a security leader is thinking about this when they roll something out to their program and potential other costs that they need to consider?
Yeah, the irony is I don't think most security leaders are thinking of this. You have some organizations that have metrics heavily built into their program that realize that every minute somebody has, or every minute somebody takes for something, you multiply that by the number of employees, and that's the number of hours, months, years, whatever it works out to be in total across the organization. And some people do think that way. It's not as common. It's more common where you do have hourly workers, where you do have contract workers. If you're in an environment that's unionized, for example, I once did an awareness program for an airline. And I found out that airline crews, such as pilots and flight attendants, in their employment contracts, they have specific number of hours devoted to training. And that training would theoretically include any security awareness training that they might take. So if you're going to give them security awareness training, you're going to have to take away other types of training, which might be airplane safety. It might be, you might say, okay, you are going to take time away from a pilot, making sure he's a better pilot. Where are the boundaries of this? So when you do this, and frankly, it's not just to make sure that you're spending your time and how much you're costing the company, you also need to think, am I doing the right thing? Way too many companies send out phishing simulations, they send out awareness videos that are almost an insult to the intelligence of most of the audience. There's something people generally don't talk about, but really at the end of the day, yes, there are significant incidents resulting from awareness related or human related failings at some point. I think, the Verizon data breach report said 82% of all attacks are the result of a user being targeted in one way or another. The reality, though, is when you look at the studies, you find somewhere like 4% of people cause most of the damage. And if you're giving somebody like, if you're giving your cybersecurity team the same training that you're giving your HR team, you are failing your organization. Because not only are you potentially taking people away from productive things, you're taking people away from productive things with irrelevant and inappropriate information as well. A phishing message, give or take. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to do something on the ethics of phishing simulations, but in general, phishing simulations, they don't take as much time away as training. And, are you giving people the appropriate training for their job roles? Some people say they do. Are they really? Or are they just bundling different pieces of awareness materials for a role? There's a difference between bundling potential awareness videos for a role compared to bundling an awareness video program for the skill level of the individual employee. You don't need your hopefully your cybersecurity staff does not need to take the equivalent of cybersecurity 101 videos when they should be taking advanced videos on, like what are SQL injection attacks and so on.
We just have 2 minutes here left, Ira. You
I'm sorry.
about. Oh, wait. No. I'm just as context for my last series of questions. I think I might be able to squeeze in one, maybe two. In a way to respond to this, right? So, the mindset of a security leader and practitioner implementing a program, you've put on their radar now how to look at the actual impact for an organization. So you're looking at things such as the cost of rolling out training and what that cost would be for a user, obviously the cost of purchasing a platform by itself. In the same chapter, you talk about a way to respond and build this business case internally is you need to be able to showcase to executive, to the board, to management, to justify the cost. You need to be able to translate it into reduced losses or some type of translation of cyber risk into business risk. How is this cost of the platform plus the cost of time of all of these employees? How is that now converting over to a business impact? Is there anything to elaborate on there?
So how is this? So I have a full chapter on metrics, which is critical, and how to take metrics. And I talk about different categories of metrics. And this is a critical element. So at the base level, you have what I call participation metrics. Who showed up? Who took, and I can't believe this is a metric, what percent of people took the mandatory training? We had 87% take. No, it's mandatory training. It's either one, you either did it or you didn't. Then you have the other thing, which is maybe you get to some, like opinion metrics like likability. Unfortunately, a lot of awareness programs are driven by touting their likability and engagement. I hate to say this, but if people say we love your materials and everything like that, for the most part, they're saying, hey, you know what? I like doing that instead of my job. Is that valuable? Then you have behavioral metrics. Behavioral metrics are those metrics that, for example, say, here's how behavior has improved. And then in the ideal world, you have return on investment metrics, which take the improvement in behavior and translate that to a dollar figure. So for example, or euro figure, whatever the currency is, but if you can, for example, go ahead and say, I reduced the number of incidents or malware incidents by X%, and then you figure out, well, gee, that means that we had 10 fewer malware incidents in our organization, and every malware incident costs $30,000. That means that you're saving $300,000 a month or whatever the case is. So that's a form of return on investment. And if you could really do that for user-related behaviors, then you really have something going. There's also a last category of metric I want to highlight, which is intangibles. Now, one intangible on a negative realm is what happens when a cybersecurity professional is forced to take an awareness course that they could have written. They hate you. That's a negative. On the other hand, there might be an intangible of a video on how to secure your children on the internet. Some people, whether they get anything or not out of that, might therefore have a better impression of the organization, saying, hey, my company is thinking of me beyond the company, and I want to go ahead and maybe have a better impression of the company. I might be able to go ahead and have, I might be more willing to report incidents to them, and so on. So you have a combination of metrics, but you really want to go ahead and have metrics to show that ideally, I mean, if you're if you're like putting a cap in your feather based upon likability, how many people showed up type of thing, that's kind of tenuous. But if you can really show return on investment or even better behavior or some form of intangibles, that's where you're going to have your major investment and your major returns.
Very valuable insights, Ira. Thank you so much. And we're now 2 minutes over. We have our full audience here that's still stuck with us, which is great. But I will wrap it up now. We try to keep these webinars very crisp and right on time here. Ira, this was perfect. Thank you so much for coming in and walking us through all your insights today. It was a lot of fun just hearing your security awareness best practices and kind of diving into the thoughts behind your book. And to our audience, thank you guys very much for being with us. I know we've got a global audience here, a lot of our friends and customers and network in Asia Pacific that sometimes joins us really late at night. And then of course, here in the US as well, whether it's your morning or afternoon, depending on where you're based. We hope you learned something today you can take with you in your role, you can take with you to share with your colleagues, and especially if you're looking to roll out your own awareness program. We look forward to seeing you all on another future webinar. Take care. Have a great rest of your week. Thank you for joining us today.